March 27th, 2024, City Council Finance Committee meeting. With us this evening, committee members present, myself, Councilor Di Natale, Chair, and Councilors Boschman and Walsh. President Zarella notified me earlier this evening that he will be unable to attend. And with a quorum of 3, we were all set to proceed. I ask, well, seeing no one's in the audience other than one member here to speak on a matter before us, no need to talk about public comment or if they're recording. Anyone who has silent electronic devices, please just make sure they're in silent mode as we proceed. So we'll begin tonight's agenda with the first item, 08624, in order that there be and hereby is appropriated the sum of $13,390 to be charged against airport receipts reserved and credited to airport improvements. I have a letter here from Airport Manager Kettle, who was unable to attend this evening due to a conflicting meeting with the Airport Commission, which for him is top priority. So I'll just read the letter that was submitted. Dear Mayor, we respectfully request an appropriation of funds from airport revenue for the design and permitting for the removal of the existing ramp and the construction of a new ramp in front of the administrative building. The last time this was repaved was in the 1980s, almost 50 years ago, and it is now in dire need of a repair reconstruction. This will dramatically improve the ramp surface, which is breaking up badly and is a potential threat to the 50-plus corporate jets visiting the airport, which could turn into a liability case if not attended to now. The local share to get this design and permitting completed is $13,390, which is 5% of the $267,800 overall cost. We trust that both yourself and the City Council will view this favorably, thereby indicating to the FAA, MassDOT, and tenants and transient users of the airport that the Fitchburg Municipal Airport is a safe place to fly to in all weather conditions. Best regards, Peter Kettle. And, Councilors, this is an internal transfer within the airport's budget.
Motion to approve.
Well, Mr. Chair, I just want to say
Yes.
I'm very happy where the taxpayers don't have to pay.
I am happy as well to see that their revenue, airport receipts, which is their revenue, is funding their own improvements, which is how it should be.
Right.
Within reason, obviously.
And I'll make the second on hers first.
Okay.
I have a motion made and seconded to approve the transfer. If there is no discussion, no objection, we'll take this under unanimous consent. Seeing none, it's approved. And the last item on the agenda this evening, 8724, order there being hereby is appropriated the sum of $710,000 from available funds to credit school department school expenses. We have Assistant Superintendent of Finance Roach here this evening to speak on this, and I have no corresponding letter other than that this is to meet our state mandated net school spending requirement for fiscal year 2024. Before I let Mr. Roach speak, if he wishes to, or answer any questions, I had some questions for the auditor that I asked yesterday, and I just want to read for the committee what her response was. My question to her was, what was the reason for this need?
Yes.
I'm not unfamiliar with, there are instances in any given fiscal year where the school department, when they submit their budget to the City Council,
Right.
it's an estimate.
Yes.
And it's based on direct and indirect expenses from the, indirect expenses from the city, transportation,
Yep.
all the like. So the number that the school committee approves and then goes to the mayor and then to the City Council for appropriation is an estimate at that time. At that time, the school department's budget was $79,864,000, and that was what was in the budget, which is inclusive of the $800,000 supplemental budget we passed in September to make the school department whole. So if you recall, Councilor Walsh wasn't here.
Right.
The budget was submitted by the school department for $79,864,000. The mayor's initial budget shorted that number by $800,000 due to higher than anticipated receipts on revenue at the close of the fiscal year. The mayor had that 800,000 to then apply to cover the school's hole at that time, which the council voted unanimously to do, making the school department whole as of September.
Right.
And I guess since that time, there have been some changes with transportation and indirect expenses. Ms.
Yeah.
Cronin told me where the number is in fact today now 710,000 more than the 79,864 that we initially approved.
So the letter that we received from the Department of Ed, which they send to every community, about, you have your foundation budget amount, the Chapter 70 that is received by from the state to the school system, and then the municipal contribution for fiscal year 24 is $96,678,000 and change, and then a little bit thereafter. As you described, we're building the budget in April, we're building the budget in May, in that time frame. The biggest sort of unknown sometimes, there are a lot, but in the indirect costs, the chargeback costs that don't count towards that net school spending amount, insurance, school choice, tuitions, charter school assessment, how much you're going to get back in charter school, insurance for retirees, some of those factors. The indirect cost was about $23,100,000, I believe, without looking at it, right in front of me. So we get the letter from the state, from the Department of Ed, Jay Sullivan. He's been in the finance department at DESE for a long time. And it literally is just, you're not going to meet your $96,678,000 and change. You're estimated to be 710,000 short on that. That is just to meet the foundation. You have to do 96,678,000 between Chapter 70 and the municipal contribution. Again, I think the part, and I don't know if anybody saw the article that was in the Globe about 2 weeks ago about the Chapter 70 formula, that FY25 is going to be a real challenge across the state for everybody. First of all, it's just way down, on the amounts that we receive, but across the 351 communities as well. But in terms of those indirect costs, that's the part that can be, and I won't even get started about transportation, because that's a whole other moving target with very few vendors.
So as I said earlier, this is not without precedent. This has happened before.
Sure, absolutely.
Because again, and it's just like with the mayor's budget, when they put forth a revenue estimate, it's typically based on the governor's numbers before the legislature has a chance to sink their teeth into it. We all know that what the governor puts forward is never what the final package is.
Right.
So sometimes we overshoot, and if we overshoot, we don't get anything back because, then the school department can use that extra to invest elsewhere.
Do other things, sure.
But the net school spending number, which is state mandated by law, is the minimum amount we must appropriate to the schools in both direct and indirect expenses.
Yeah.
And sometimes, as Mr. Roach said, the indirect expenses can be lighter than we expected, more than we expected, and it's a fluid number. And this year, unfortunately, they were higher than expected. But I've seen this happen a few times in the past, where we pass a budget and then we find out later on. My only question to you is, from a process perspective, does the school department know that we're short before the letter from DESE? Or does DESE do like an analysis and a certification of the final numbers and say, you're short?
So there's an end-of-year report, and in our office at Fitchburg Public Schools, we complete that, and it's aligned with a number of sort of cost centers that are all the same for everybody. So you fill out that information, and what DESE does is around, I would say, February, March, they start to assess whether or not communities are going to meet that net school spending requirement. Whatever they've determined. For fiscal year 25, it's 101 million. It's 101 and change. It's like a little bit more than that. And the municipal, we're still working on indirect costs right now, though we're going to move to the school committee in early May to have them vote a budget, because we got to move forward with the fiscal year. it'll still be a little bit of a moving target. But to your question, DESE then updates communities around this time frame, you know, because in the letter they sent us, we had met the previous year, and that was an $88 million or thereabouts overall budget, and this year's 96. That's where they noted, you know, you are set, you're on track to be short. And my understanding of net school spending, you know, in doing various webinars with the Department of Ed, is the average community goes 27% above whatever so say it's $100 million, they're going to do 127. They're going to assess everybody the same way in terms of looking at where they are. If you're short, they're going to then tell you you're short. If you have more than 5% under, they actually have penalties and carryovers to the following budget. That has not happened in Fitchburg, which is great. I don't think it's that common from what I've looked at in other communities, because you can look at every city. This one is sort of within that range on a large budget like that of almost $100 million, where those indirect costs can be variable. I mean, the ones that we see now that I think are challenging because you have not much control over how much they assess you is insurance and transportation costs.
So the auditor.
And special ed to some degree too, because they set, when we have to place a student outside of the district per their IEP, the Operation Services Division, you know, the state contract, they determine the rate of increase for those schools. Last year they increased it by 14%. And when some of the residential placements are $450,000 for one student, you can just imagine what 14% is, and that's one student coming out of, and it's necessary, you have to do it, but it's a monster cost.
Yeah, so the auditor did mention that the primary drivers was transportation and charter school reimbursement.
Yeah, that too. Yep, for sure.
So I just want the public to know and the council to know that this is not without precedent. This is not because we knowingly shorted the schools $700,000.
Right.
The schools were whole as far as we were concerned when the fiscal year started. And after further assessments, and remember, the school year doesn't start until 3 months after we pass the budget.
Right.
And so many things are moving at that time. And as I said, sometimes we have enough and we don't have to do this, and sometimes we're short, and so that's what the free cash is for, to plug that gap. But I will note, too, that the council does have a choice not passing this, but by not passing it, we are now in violation.
Yeah.
And what the state will say to the council and the city is, that $700,000 you're not going to give the school department, that's not going away. That's tacked on like carries over to next year. You owe that indefinitely until you pay.
Right.
It's like from a bank, you know.
It does not go away.
It generates interest. It's never going away. So
That's right.
we either pass it or we be penalized. But this is not due to poor planning or lack of foresight. This just happens every now and then where we have a fresh assessment and we're either over or we're short.
Yeah, and it happens in other communities as well. I mean, this isn't exclusive to Fitchburg by any means.
So opening up to questions. Council Boschman.
I've got a couple of questions.
Sure.
Try to take it easy.
Yeah, no need.
When you say indirect costs,
Yeah.
I hear you say the indirect costs, and I'm not questioning you. I hear so much about school choice, and when we get the budget,
Sure.
I see in there it's 2 to 1 for every one person that comes in to leave to go somewhere else. And then I also hear from some members of the school committee and some other people saying, our school system is marvelous and we're doing excellent and we're way ahead on this and that and that. Then I said to myself, if we're that good, why aren't they, hi, I'd like to come from New Hampshire, I want to come here to Fitchburg High School.
Yeah.
Vast more, instead of having 2 to 1. Can you answer me on that one there? And my other second question is, the other second question is, you touched on it a little bit, transportation. I'm not going to go into big detail, but I'd like to know what changed since I was a kid to 50 years or 60 years later, where now we're stopping at every other door to pick up a kid instead of everybody meeting at the corner. I never saw that before in my life until the last probably 6 years, 7 years.
Yeah.
Every other house. It's almost every other house that you got to sit there instead of all meeting at one corner to save money for transportation.
Right. Well, so school choice, I'll tackle that one first because I think it is an important factor. And the one thing to understand about school choice is in the foundation budget, meaning the budget, that 96 million, that comes from mainly the number of students we enroll, and that is any really K to 12 aged student who attends a public school. Not charter. Charter's a little different.
Right.
But so they could be attending Lunenburg, or they could be attending Leominster, you know, if those schools participate in school choice, which they do. We receive the foundation per pupil amount for that student. We then pay that other community $5,800. So the per pupil last year was $17,070, something like that, $17,100, I think. It's gone up to $17,800, I think, for this coming year. And I'm not saying it's a good thing when a lot of your, you know, if you say a number, say 2 to 1, are school choicing out versus school choicing in. One thing I'll say is we don't have school choice open in grades K to 8 right now. So we are not accepting students into grades K through 8 for school choice for space issues. So we aren't getting any students for school choice in those grade levels. We take them in high school, and so Goodrich Academy and Fitchburg High School certainly do. Again, it's part and parcel with just the factor around class sizes in the grades 1 through 8. What I will say, when I was principal at Fitchburg High School, I did write a letter to the Board of Education, and I asked them to carefully look at school choice. And my data that I provided to them was you could make a through line from certain communities to other communities where it was 2 to 1. And typically it was 2 to 1 out in what I would describe as gateway cities, and 2 or 3 to 1 in the neighboring community that was much more affluent. I showed them the chart. I put Fitchburg in there, and I showed communities. I showed this how many we have, this how many in, and this is communities around us that are non-gateway cities with the number they have in and versus the number they have out. And then you could look at Holyoke and Pittsfield and Springfield and Lowell, and it was the exact same pattern. You think I got a response from them about that? No. But it's an issue that the state encounters. I think it's one that we encounter. I will say in Fitchburg High, we were fortunate to receive a decent amount of students. We averaged between 40 and 60 school choice in to Fitchburg High when I was there, and I think it's about 48 right now, something like that. Kids are attracted to school districts for different reasons, but I do think that issue that I just described, that I wrote that letter to the Board of Ed about, is a systemic problem with respect to the school choice, the way that school choice operates in our state. And I won't give you what I think the reason is, or some of the reasons are, but I think that as I highlighted it in the communities that see more 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 or 4 to 1 out, they had a similar kind of profile. In terms of the bus stop issue, in the contract that we just submitted for yellow buses, for regular school day buses, we'll have 30 buses in the overall fleet of, we do 3 tiers, so they'll cycle through 3 times potentially, 2 to 3. So I'll get more information specifically because I do see some decent-sized bus stops when I'm driving around. It may not be as many as like, for example, if it's running through Clegon or West Fitchburg or something, a neighborhood in town. I know there are corner locations where 5, 6, 7, 8 kids are located and they'll get picked up. I'll talk to the transportation coordinator. What I see on most of the runs is, I think, about 15 to 20 maybe or so stops in terms of pickups and then drop-offs in the afternoon. I think that's pretty average. And they use a software to kind of figure that out, so it's evenly distributed, and the walking distances are relatively similar. But I can get more information about that. Again, I don't know how much it's changed. I always walked. Where I grew up in the city, I lived close enough to the school where I didn't qualify for a bus, so I had to walk every day, which was fine.
You don't want, one thing, I don't want you to get the wrong impression.
Yeah.
I live in Cleveland, you know that.
Sure.
And I see the kids, well, the junior high and high school kids.
Yeah.
On the corner of Oak Hill Road. I also see some on the corner of St. Joseph Ave.
Right.
And, you know, I'm not questioning that part. I was just questioning the other part where they're a little bit younger. They're like, what do you call it, preschool? Not preschool, at school, when they're in the first, second, third grade?
Elementary.
Elementary.
Yeah.
There, I think they go door to door, or almost door. I call it door to door. But, because I know I got stuck behind a bus one time, and I said, what the heck are we doing? You stop here, and then 2 minutes later, the next house is there, and they toot the horn, and a couple minutes later, the kid comes out, and the next house skipped that one, the next one there, and I said, when did this all change?
Yeah, I'll ask about that. I don't know if there's a difference for elementary and middle. I think there's probably some difference for sure.
It might be a lot younger too. I don't know. You know, I don't get to see the kids because they run right out with the parent into the bus and they go back in. So I thought Bet Walsh would, but she's keeping quiet on that one. That's it. I yield the floor.
One question I get before we wrap
Sure.
this up from people is about the transportation costs fluctuating so much, or not so much fluctuating, but not having a definitive idea year to year or every
Right.
so often. And they ask me, why is that? If the school department has a good idea of how many kids are utilizing transportation and the
Yeah.
number of stops and the routes, and there's a contract, why is it always so in flux? I mean,
Well, so-
is it gasoline costs? Is it what?
Lack of
what-
competition
Okay,
is one factor.
so they drive up the price how often do the bus company renew their, every year, every 3 years? Like what?
We had a situation, so we just settled on 3 separate bus contracts that will be in effect for July 1 of this year, up to 5 years. That's actually a good thing, because there's really 3 transportation modes for your school-aged students. There's the vast majority of students, they take the regular yellow buses. That's a contract we have with a particular vendor. And then for special ed, so students who have been determined through their learning disability, the IEP, in a team meeting process that they're going to either require another school, so that's referred to as out-of-district special ed. That's about, it's 160 students of the 5,400 that are enrolled right now. They would require specifically transportation door to door of whatever the facility is. That's a significant cost. Then there's in-district special ed transportation to vans. You typically see those. You might see those around. And those would be for students who, attend the schools, one of the 8 schools, but they're not, again, for whatever reason was determined at their team meeting, there was an agreement that they need a different form of transportation than the regular yellow bus. Sometimes it's physical disabilities. They might be in a wheelchair, so we have 3 vans that do that. Others might be, typically it's an emotional impairment of some sort in their IEP. Those have a certain cost as well. What happened with us this particular year was we were out of sequence on our bus contracts. So we ended up going out to bid for 1 year for special ed, so 2 of the forms of transportation. We're now going to be in cycle where all 3 are under contract for the next up to 5 years because they're like 1 year renewable. That came back at $4.7 million. Just for the 2 forms of special ed transportation, which is about 600 students. And
0.7?
one bidder, and it's the same bidder from most districts across the state. and you really don't have much recourse around driving competition. We got a little bit. The city procurement office and myself and our transportation coordinator worked this year for, I'd say, a month and a half to build bid specifications to try to generate some competition and get our bid docs out way earlier. We got them out in December, and we got a lot of interest from smaller transportation companies, but they struggle with potentially, like a district our size, you got to have 20 vans. You know, you got to have that. And we had a lot of interest from, again, some smaller and local companies. You know, I was hopeful there. I think we all were. You know, you want to see local companies potentially, but they may not have the actual resources, because then you're also going to need service department, you need drivers, you got to have all those kinds of things that a larger company has. So I think to your question, Councilor Di Natale, it's an issue that is constantly being discussed in the role I'm in now. In our threads is just rising transportation costs with little recourse. We have pursued electric buses, a grant that would potentially provide us 10. We're hopeful. We actually pursued this with the bus contractor that we have an agreement with for the yellow buses, for the large school buses. You know, we feel like that would help us with some of those costs that maybe you could manage a little bit differently. This particular company, for a student, would also have the infrastructure for that. You know, they would have some of the wherewithal to be able to do the charging and the different things that you also need when you change your fleet. But yeah, transportation is a massive challenge, cost-wise.
Council Walsh. Yep.
Thank you. Mr. Roach, you mentioned the foundation amount and the $96 million.
Yeah.
You said it's calculated per student. It's about $17,000.
That's what it was this year, yeah.
Okay. Is that amount the same for every city, or does that amount change depending on?
Changes. So the biggest thing with the foundation budget establishment by the state is what group you're in.
Okay.
So they have 12 groups. Right. Group 1, and it's based on your number of students that are categorized as or qualify for low income.
Okay.
So Group 1 would be a community with 0 to 5.99% of their students qualify as low income. Group 12 would be 80% or more. We're Group 11. So we're at 78.3% of the student population is low income. So that means our rates at which they would multiply our 5,400 students is higher.
Okay. So
that we get an increased amount. Like the biggest driver for us in the columns, so the columns are elementary students, middle school students, high school students. You know, there's some special ed columns, there's ESL columns, there's a pre-K column, then there's low income. That one is 1/3 of our 101 million comes from that, because that's 4,100 students.
All right, thank you.
Does that yeah.
Is the issue at the state level right now that the funding formula is out of date? Have I heard that correctly, that Chapter 70, the formula is,
well,
it needs revision or it needs amendment?
I think the biggest thing, so there's a joint letter, and this is going to surprise you, the groups that signed on to this together. The MTA, the American Federation of Teachers, AFT, the Mass Association of School Committees, and the Mass Association of State Superintendents signed a joint letter about the Chapter 70, the state funding mechanism. Because for us, it's the number of students we have, a wage adjustment factor. We don't get that. That would be like Newton. They'd kick it up a little bit, figuring, you know, the price values, the house value is so high that a teacher, you know, so they increase it a little bit for some communities for wage adjustment factor. But it's enrollment and the inflation rate. So when the inflation rate was 8 or whatever it was, instead of multiplying by 8, they're supposed to take that number, they cap it at 4.5.
Yeah, so
This year, it was multiplied by 1.35%, because inflation went down a bit. So instead of just having a fixed number like 4.5, that we could then know, all right, I know my enrollment, I can figure out what we're going to get. We're waiting around, and when they released the budget on January 26th, I remember this date, this year, you could hear it across the state, like, what? We were counting on 2, 3, 4, Worcester, $28 million increase to 14. Fitchburg, $6.97 million to 3.1. I mean, this is like, and then many communities only got the $30 per student increase. If they were like one of those group 1, 2, 3, you know, they have far fewer
So you're saying that
low-income
in a year like we're in, where inflation is 6, 7, 8, 9%,
they'll cap it.
they'll cap it at 4.5.
Yeah.
But we're lucky if we get the 4.5.
Well, this past year, 1.35.
Right. So it's actually two issues then. Is you would think we get the 4.5 if inflation is more than 4.5.
And we
The
don't.
state has a mechanism where, well, that's just the maximum you could get. So if your prices are going up
Right.
7, 8%, we're only going to increase you by 1.3. I mean, that's for years that we're going through right now. That's where we could really get hurt. Is in high inflationary periods, we're getting hurt hard.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where, again, that very diverse perspective group have all signed on this advocacy letter to say, you got to make it so that it's consistent and more reflective of actual inflation.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, we're going to run into these scenarios. We're seeing it across the state right now. A lot of budget cuts happening in communities and that kind of thing. Yeah, I'm sorry to go deep on this, but
We're asking the question. I mean, Council Boschman.
Question. On your, you said it was 88 million this year, your budget?
96,678.
How much?
96,678,000.
Can I ask you a question? You spent all of the $96 million. Is it all gone at the end of the fiscal year, or do you carry some over in case of emergency? And should I say it? Fix up some of the buildings. Do you do any of that? Or is it all gone for wages or?
So we can't really carry over our budget.
So you have to spend it.
We attempt to spend it. So to your point, one thing a lot of communities are dealing with now too is a bit of a teacher shortage. So what you have budgeted isn't always what you spend. So you might have some encumbered at the end, and we do try to utilize that for capital improvements. We can only go up to $150,000 though on a capital improvement, and then the remainder has to be charged to the city. Right. That's Chapter 150E, I believe, is the mass regulation around that. And again, the same people that sent that letter, you know, about the 710 will send the one about, hey, you can't do that. Yeah. So that said, we have a lot of capital projects that are ready to launch this summer. They're ESSER, the Federal Elementary Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. So we have $11 million in projects that are out to bid right now. They will start like literally the day after school gets out. You know, I mean, HVAC upgrades, roof upgrades, surveillance system, front door systems, bunch of things. We will potentially utilize some of maybe what we have. If we have anything, we figure we'll have a little bit. And we'll use some, like, if we have 50,000 to put towards surveillance here and 50,000 or 75 to put to the HVAC at Memorial and another 70 over here to the HVAC at South Street, that's how we try to do it.
That's why the big ticket items that they have needed have gone through MSBA.
Yeah.
And we have funded some of that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and we have a couple.
I've seen the presentations you've done at school committee meetings where it's a PowerPoint. It's a litany of projects by schools that they're working on, in the pipeline, got to go through MSBA. I mean, the list is huge. I've seen it.
How come
So
he
they're making good inroads.
How come he
on it.
doesn't do it in front of the counselors sometime either?
Well, I mean, I'm sure that the school department would be more than willing to have. I mean,
glad to.
work with President Zarella to do a presentation. Maybe even during the budget sessions we have that done. I mean, but I believe, Mr. Roach, you've sent it to me in the past. There's a PowerPoint that they maintain that shows everything by
All
school
the
with
different
what
big
they're-
things.
what
I'll
they're
send it
working
to you if you want it. I just updated it. I can send you that advocacy letter, too. It's interesting to see, because I think it gives you a little bit of that sense of, we're unique because we're Fitchburg, and we love that, and we're prideful around our community. At the same time, the other 350 communities are also aggravated to some degree, or a large degree, by that Chapter 70 formula.
Yeah.
And that's what we share, I think, across, whether you're from Weston or Springfield or Worcester or Provincetown or North Adams, all across the state. That's like the thing I see in the threads, especially for business managers, assistant supers for the role I'm in.
Yeah, so to answer your question, what they are required to get in NSS, they have to use. It stays
Yeah,
with them.
have
It doesn't
to.
come back to the city. And I recall a few years ago when the school department had a very similar issue here, and the 700,000, I think it was almost 700,000 if I recall, that we gave to the schools to meet net school spending. The schools were able to use that 700,000 for technology needs,
Oh, that could very well
technology,
be. Yeah.
like computers,
Yep.
Equipment, stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
not necessarily capital infrastructure. It's more materials for the schools.
Right.
But they didn't, I don't want to say they didn't need the money, but they were all set. But the state said, no, you owe another 700,000. So the school said, okay, we'll take the 700,000 and buy all this new equipment.
Right.
That we wouldn't have normally gotten. But the bottom line is the money is earmarked for them. It must stay with them. And that's just the letter of the law in the state. So
I don't want you to get me wrong when I start asking questions. I want to be able to make sure our students can make that three-point shot out there in the real world.
I
Not a
agree.
Make-believe shot, a real good shot.
No,
Compared to the other competition.
Listen, my job is to try to answer the questions. This stuff it can be, it's confusing for everybody. I mean, I think it's confusing for people in my role sometimes. So I have no problem with any of the questions.
And one other question, 4.7 million, I want to touch back on that. Did I hear you correctly? That's just for 160 students?
That's for 160 who would be out-of-district placement. Some of those are residential, though, so they're placed, and they don't necessarily require transportation. For the out-of-district placement right now, we're doing about 110 that would have the van day, from point to point. That's $272 a day. They often require a monitor as well, and they're $112 a day. So that's every day for every run. Sometimes they require 2 monitors. For the in-district special ed students, that's $425. Those vans, this year, it's $541 a day.
Wow.
And again, one bid. So we didn't have the opportunity to say, oh, let's take a look at these and compare and contrast and try to, have the best contract for the city, for the schools, for the kids. And, it is what it is. And I'm not saying this company does not deliver. That by no means they're able to. It's just the costs are a challenge.
I'm surprised Mott doesn't get involved in that. I do know they get vans that pick you up, they bring you to the doctors and all that.
Yeah. Again, when we went out to bid, we separated them into 3, hoping that by making it smaller, we could attract some more competition, especially, with the special ed transportation side of things. And the large yellow bus, too. I mean, the more competition, the better. I mean, that's the whole point of public procurement. But it's just there's not many companies out there that are equipped to do the large-scale type of transportation. And I don't think it's an easy industry. I mean, I think, there's like every industry, you have employees that you have to have and maintain and grow, and you need space, and you need fuel, and you need service, and you need a lot of these other factors, a lot of insurance, but on our end, it's we look at the bills, and we're not alone the concern there.
I yield the floor.
Motion to approve?
I'll second that one.
Motion made and seconded to approve 087-24. If there are no objections to the motion, we'll take this on unanimous consent. It is approved. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate it. Guess if-
To adjourn?
Motion made to adjourn. If there are no objections, we are adjourned. Thank you.